What are some of the examples of human experiences that you had that you think shaped who you are today? What was one of the earliest memories, maybe?
My mom is a Bible scholar, and she reads the Bible every day. Not all of it, but she moves through it every single day. What I found fascinating is that she's been reading the same book for decades now. And every day she'll send me an email or a message about a scripture and how it pertains to her life as she sees it now in this moment, how it has been and how she thinks it will be. And what I found particularly fascinating about that is the fact that it's the same book, and yet it keeps meaning so many different things to her. The same story, but it keeps meaning so many different things. And I sometimes think about my life in that way, is depending on where I am, depending on the moment, depending on where I've been and where I'm going, the same experience reveals a different part of me. The same experience reveals why I am who I am, or why I'm doing what I'm doing, or why I even have an idea of who I am or why I am. And so recently, maybe, since you're asking me, what is one of these things? What is something? I think back to how not having shaped how I see the world, shaped how I move in the world. Not having food sometimes, not having money sometimes, not even having luxury items sometimes, whether it be clothing or cars, whatever it may be. But recently I've found myself going, man, so much of how you define yourself is through the lens of having or not having, particularly because of how you grew up. And so it's not about having or not having now, but it's in the small things. It's like how I order food, or why I order the food that I do in the way that I do, is partially because of having or not having. And so I would say that's maybe one of the biggest experiences that I find has recently been like just shining a light on how I grew up.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I've often reflected on something similar, and I've called it gifts or gaps. The having or not having.
Interesting.
So certain gifts that I had growing up, handed to me by my parents or by my family.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right?
And then what are the gaps?
Well, there were gaps. Like there were things that you didn't have. So whether that would be a present parent or I didn't have the latest Nike sneakers or Nike shoes, as we would call them
Nike
in London.
Same,
I would call them Nike.
Africa,
Yeah, exactly.
Call them Nike.
Yeah, Nike.
And then you meet Americans,
Nike,
you sound like an idiot.
Yeah, exactly. Nike and Adidas.
Yes.
As I say, Adidas, not Adidas. And so those kind of gaps, and obviously those are very crude examples, but and do you find yourself editing those now? Like, do you find yourself saying, okay, I didn't have this and therefore I have this behavior. I did have this and therefore I have this behavior. Do you feel like your behavior today wants an upgrade because of your new lifestyle, or a downgrade? Or you kind of think, no, I'm happy living with the same beliefs and values and systems that I had from back then?
All I'm constantly trying to do is acknowledge them. I try my best to eliminate good or bad. I really do. And the reason I do that is not because I exist in a spiritual world, although I think we all do, but not because of that. I think of it more because I realize everything and everyone is going to have a good or bad, So I have yet to meet a person who doesn't think some parts of their childhood were tough.
Yes.
But now it's when we compare the toughness that people then say, oh, actually, I didn't have it tough. You had it tough. And like people will say to me, oh, man, you grew up so poor in South Africa and, growing up in the township and whatever. And I would say to them, I didn't feel like this because I would see, for instance, the slums in India. I go like, man, and maybe I was lucky, funny enough, because in South Africa we had news that was global, and because it was so, I think it was so broad, I had an awareness. So I didn't think what I was living through was the worst possible thing.
Yes.
But now relative to how many other people live, they've put me down at the bottom of a list.
Yes, yes.
And so I often don't think of it as good or bad. I just try and go, oh, that happened, that didn't happen. Because of that, I adapted accordingly. There's a lot of rainfall. So then this plant will start growing in that way. There isn't as much rainfall, the plant will grow another way. Is it good or is it bad? That's oftentimes something that's subjective because of who runs the world or who tells us how the world should be or isn't, or you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, and I love that you've simplified it as awareness, because that awareness or acknowledgement, as you said,
I try.
Of keeping it that way is often quite sacred, to be able to say, no, I'm just observing, I'm just seeing.
Yeah. But it's hard.
Yeah, it's hard. And you reminded me, I was 9 years old when I first visited India. I was born and raised in London, but my mom was born and raised in Yemen, and my father was born and raised in India, but my parents are Indian.
What part of India?
My father was from Mangalore, which is like southern India. And then my mother is from Gujarat, which is northern India.
Right.
But she was born and raised in Yemen, so she moved to London when she was 16. But when I went to India for the first time when I was 9 years old, I remember we were in a car and we were not well off, so we weren't staying in a fancy hotel or whatever, but we had enough money to visit, which is significant for the air flight. And I remember going in this car, and you just sparked this. And I remember like stopping at a traffic light and just looking out, and I saw all these slums. And I mean, I'd never seen something like that in London. And I saw these little legs poking out of like a barrel of a trash can. And I was just, and the legs looked little, like of someone my age, like around. And then slowly I saw her whole body come out. And it was this girl, and she didn't have any hands. And she'd just been like trying to scrape the bottom. And I remember being 9 years old, and she was probably like maybe the same age, maybe a little less. Like, and I remember just looking at her and feeling like totally helpless, because I was in the car on the other side of the highway, and I can't go and help her. I want to, but I also don't know what help means as a 9-year-old. And it was one of those experiences that, you know, and then I went back, I remember, to my hotel, and I remember hearing like someone was arguing about not enough menu options on the buffet. And it was like connecting the dots, as you're saying, of like, you know, when you see your experience and then you see someone else's experience,